I know very little about anything neural, but I do ask people questions, and I do know a lot about behaviour. So I'll be doing, talking about some work that I've been doing with colleagues. One of the things that we're interested in is how people think about or reason morally about things that go beyond the boundaries of humanity. We often sort of talk about, morality in terms of what we all sort of deserve, but rather what we're interested in is how do we think about non-human morality? And one of the things that becomes interesting in that space is that these non-humans are often also resources. And so this sets up a particular kind of tension, which I want to kind of just tease out first. Before I just take you through some of the sorts of studies that we've been running and just, I guess you get a bit of a flavour of the sorts of things that we've been doing. But I guess to start with, it's fair to say that we all agree that, that humans have rights. Ever since the abolition of slavery, mostly around the world, we would mostly agree on this fact. What's less agreed upon is the idea that there may be non-human rights, that non-humans may have rights. Now, there's a guy called Stephen Wise who's been seeking bodily freedom on behalf of animals. A particular case he's been looking at is apes, who were held at Stony Brook University. Now, this sounds like a pretty good thing to do, right? Giving animals bodily freedom. This sounds positive. Well, it is unless you are Richard Epstein from NYU, who says the potential practical consequences of such an outcome would eventually abolish long established institutions like the agricultural and food production industry. There would be nothing left of human society. Right, so now it's not quite so clear whether giving animals bodily freedom is all that good anymore, and so there seems to be some sort of tension here. I think this is what is psychologically fascinating. Now, the fact is that animals are getting rights, so the Spanish Parliament extended rights to apes back in 2008. There is a sort of move to, start setting up some of these sorts of these precedents, but of course, there are some conflicts around this. What's interesting is it's not just animals. This is a river in New Zealand which has a legal identity. It has a status of personhood, much like a corporate organisation, for example. So this is not a river that we're going to be able to use for agriculture or other things to try and grow or feed our own resource needs anytime soon, because it's been given some rights. It's not an animal. It's not a person. It's even a river. And of course, these sorts of issues come with a lot of tensions. This is Tony Burke, who approved an open cut mine for the Tarkine region. Now, the environmentalists were outraged by this because this was also the area of the Tasmanian devil, the habitat of the Tasmanian devil, which is endangered. And so this was sort of seen as an outrageous decision. There was a lot of upset from that side of the camp that we should be getting resources from this region when it interrupts the natural habitat. Tony Burke also made this decision where he actually approved the world's largest marine reserve. Now what we found was the people who are upset with the fishing communities, the people who made an income and provided resources for their communities from fishing. So you can see again, there's this sort of tension being played out between our needs and our rights and the needs and rights of non-humans, which often are also linked to the resources that we need for our purposes too. And of course, this is happening in a context where the human population is growing exponentially. Now, it seems that that's not entirely true. There is some sort of, decline in the exponential nature of this growth, but we're still growing. There's more and more people on the earth, and we are trying to obviously, use resources which are also limited in nature. So there's this sort of, growing demand. There's not a growing number of resources. So this sort of sets up what I'm referring to as a kind of moral bottleneck. So as you can see here in this slide, we have human rights on the one hand, and we have non-human rights on the other. Now, when we think about our own resource needs, this places some weight in our decision making in favour of human rights. Okay, this is sort of, we have resource needs. We have the right to satisfy those needs. This is all about human rights and what we have a right to. But then our moral sensitivity, which happens to also be growing. I mean, the very fact that this conference is happening is evidence of that. It probably wouldn't have been around 20 years ago or 30 years ago. Our sensitivity to factors beyond our own needs and the rights and needs of those entities is growing. But at a time when resources are also limited, and the human population, our own needs are also expanding. So, of course, when we our moral sensitivities places emphasis back on the rights and needs of non-humans. And so you can see there's this sort of tension. Now, as a social psychologist, this is fascinating. This is a motivated space. This is the space where people's reasoning goes all defunct. We can start to study it and look at how bloody inconsistent we are about this entire thing, which is fun, which is fun. So I want to talk about 3 lines of research which we've been working on, which gets at this issue, and I don't have an answer to the issue, but I do have some interesting ideas about it. The first part is looking at what limits sensitivity to non-humans. How is our moral reasoning motivated in that space, in particular by our own appetites? The second is looking at some work we've been doing, looking at what sort of things expand sensitivity to non-humans. What are the sorts of things that maybe predict our willingness to make sacrifices for things beyond even the boundaries of humanity. And then I want to get at something which is perhaps a little esoteric, I apologise, and it's some new work, so it's not published or anything like that, but I'm interested in it because what I'm fascinated by is how we can actually see rivers as having some sort of moral identity. On what basis do we do that? Philosophers in the room will know that sentience is a really important factor for determining whether something is deserving of some sort of moral consideration. In psychology or moral psychology, we talk about mind, whether things have minds. Rivers don't have minds, old growth forests don't have minds. What's the basis on which we are becoming more sensitive to even these further and further sorts of resources, or these further and further entities beyond our own selves? So I want to talk a little bit about that too. So to start with, I want to talk to you about something we've been working with we call the meat paradox. This has been getting a little bit, the term itself has become a little more popularised in some sort of way. And the meat paradox is effectively this. Most people eat meat. Many of those same people are upset by the cruelty to animals that meat eating requires. This is a conflict. This is a paradox. How do we resolve it, right? Because if you're going to eat meat and be upset about animal cruelty, then this is a conflict. Now, you can see this conflict when you look at that. For a meat eater, that is a particularly appetising set of pictures, until then you look at that, and you go, oh, suddenly your appetite is diminished. Right there we can see the conflict between our moral sensitivities and our appetites. It's a very real, very visceral sort of conflict. Now, how do we get around this? How do we resolve the meat paradox? This is something which we need to resolve every single time we eat meat. So, this is psychologically interesting. How do we do it? One of the things that we suggest, and we've shown, is that people downplay the mental lives of animals. Why? Because this makes animals seem less morally relevant and reduces our feelings of concern for their welfare. Things which don't have minds aren't morally relevant. And so I guess you could put it like this: we enjoy eating meat, we don't like eating minds. And so we tested this statement. We asked people to rate these different animals on how much mind they had and how edible they were. And you can see there's a nice negative correlation there between how mindful an animal is and how edible it is seen to be. Now, you might say, well, that's all very well and fine, Brock, but this is just because people chose well. They chose prawns, which probably don't have a mind. Well, we don't really know that, do we? But it would seem that way. Prawns definitely seem less mindful than apes or dogs. Well, maybe we did choose well. Maybe we did choose the animals that don't have minds, but I think it's a lot more motivated than that. We also showed people this picture of a cow, both meat eaters and vegetarians, and we told them that this cow was standing, in one condition we told them this cow was standing in the paddock doing nothing much more than cows do, just standing in paddocks. In another condition we told them that the cow was standing in the paddock, was about to be taken to an abattoir and slaughtered for the purposes of meat production. Then we asked people to indicate how much they thought the cow could experience these different sorts of mental states. So pleasure and fear, rage, joy, happiness, desiring, wishing, planning, pain, hunger, tasting, seeing, hearing, choosing, thinking, intending, imagining, and reasoning. How much can a cow do this? Well, it depends. If you're a vegetarian, you just, on average, tend to think you can do more of that. And you're not very sensitive to whether or not you think what's going to happen to the cow. It doesn't affect you because you're not part of the system. For a meat eater, you can see that there's a difference there. in the food condition, when the cow was presented as going to the abattoir, the meat eaters sort of downplayed the mental lives of the cow just a little bit. Again, probably because they realised they were part of that process. Now we wanted to test this even further and more directly, and so we had people come into the lab, and we had them sit around a large table. There was about sort of 8 to 10 people in each, sitting around a table. We gave them a bunch of questionnaires at the start. Inside that package of questionnaires was this same mind attribution task that I told you about before. So they went through and they completed all these questionnaires, including that particular one. It was sort of embedded and hidden. And then we told them, now you're going to be doing a different study. You're going to be participating in a study about consumer behaviour. We're going to sample some food and just rate, its various qualities. And half the people were told, these were all meat eaters, we were sure of that. Half the people were told that they would be sampling green apples. The other half of the people were told they'd be sampling delicatessen beef. We brought the plates out, we sat them down on the table, they could see them. The research assistant said, look, I'm just going to go out of the room and grab some cutlery and plates for you before, so that you can sample the food. Look, just while I'm gone, could you quickly do this one more questionnaire for me? Gave them the mind attribution task again, and also asked them to rate their mood. This is what we found. The meat eaters in the fruit sampling group didn't change the perception of a cow from time 1 to time 2. At time 1, most people in both groups, no matter which, they gave the cow a certain level of mental, capacity. Those who were about to eat an apple didn't change that view. Those who thought they were about to eat the meat significantly downplayed how much mind they felt the cow had. And what's fascinating is that the extent to which they did this, it made them feel better about the fact they were about to have to eat that meat. You can see this is a really motivated online psychological process that people are engaging in the moment. It's not just necessarily a good choice. So, I want to talk now about some work we've been looking at about, this concept of moral expansiveness. This sort of started a little bit with some of Peter Singer's work on the moral circle, and what we're interested in is the fact that some people have bigger moral circles than others. So here's some examples. Some people have some very small moral circles. Very small, in fact. And there are other people who apparently have much bigger, fruitarians, for example, much bigger moral circles. This is people who care about fruit. So, this varies. And so this is interesting psychologically that it varies between people. And so we wanted to see if we could measure this variance. And so we developed a measure. We call it the moral expansiveness scale. We show people these different circles because there's levels of moral consideration. It's not just ones and zeros. It's not just black and white. People have different levels. So you can have your inner circle, your outer circle, the fringes of concern, and then outside of the moral boundary. These are things that don't matter. And so we asked people to place 33 entities which fell into 11 different categories. There were some human categories, family and friends. I'll go through those in a minute. And there was also some non-human categories. So people placed these 33 entities where they felt they fit within their moral world. One thing that was very fascinating is that the actual structure of people's moral worlds, at least with these entities, is really, really consistent. And it looks like this. So you have in your inner circle of family and friends. After that you have your in-group, then sort of revered people sort of seen as heroes. Stigmatised groups are in there as well. Out-groups, so just other groups that aren't considered your own. Then we get out into sort of high sentient animals, the environment still in there, low sentient animals still deserving of some concern. Plants, just sort of, they're still there though, they're still on the inside. Villains, not doing so well, up there with the robots. So yeah, don't become a villain. You'll be outside the circle of trust. So we wanted to know, what's interesting about this is what other people who are putting these. So this thing expands and contracts. This is what we're measuring, right? It's pretty consistent in its ordering, but it expands and contracts. So we're capturing this variance in people's moral expansiveness. Now, is there a cost involved with being morally expansive? So we wanted to test this. We asked people. We told people that there was a sort of. But we wanted to know, would they sacrifice their lives to save various different sorts of things? So we told them there was a hypothetical dictator who was going to kill a bunch of stuff or destroy a bunch of stuff. And we want to know how many of these things would need to be at risk for people to sacrifice their own lives. So we pilot tested this with people that we knew, and they found this decision-making excruciating. It was actually quite troubling for people. So this is what it looked like here. So, you've got this dictator has decided to murder people from your hometown, assuming there's no other options, nobody else is going to volunteer, that your death would be completely painless. And the sacrificing life would definitely save the lives of people in your hometown. How many people from your hometown will need to be murdered by the dictator for you to sacrifice yourself in their place? 1 to 10, 10 to 100, 100 to 1,000, 10%, 20%, 90%, 100%. I would never have to sacrifice my life at all. And people had to make this decision, right? But not only for people of their hometown, but also for example, coral reefs. How many coral reefs would have to go before you sacrifice your own life? Now, this is just, obviously just a thought experiment. And I suspect that people are less willing than they even say they are to actually sacrifice their own lives for any of these things. But, we're still getting a some sort of decision-making process. And what we found was that the more morally expansive the people's worlds were, the more likely they were to sacrifice their lives, except for ants. But, everything else was predicted by this. So, then people were willing, obviously expanding. You can't just expand your moral world freely. It comes with a cost. And so you are more willing to take on that cost. You have to be, to expand that moral world. So, what I want to talk about, the third point I want to talk about is, what is it that explains sensitivity to non-humans? What is the basis on which we are affording this kind of concern to non-human entities? Now, we know that that there's a paper that's quite well cited in the moral psychology field that mind is the essence of morality. So if you have a mind, then you're considered to be morally relevant. And this is also the idea within probably more of a philosophical notion of sentience. If you can experience pain, that's the point to which that you should probably be considered morally relevant. And of course, this explains why babies are morally relevant, because they can experience pain. We should treat them as these are important moral targets. It also explains why animals may be considered morally relevant as well, and as we've shown, the extent to which they possess a mind makes them things that we should care about. But how do we think about the basis of moral consideration for an old-growth forest? I mean, who here has the sort of belief that destroying an old-growth forest is a morally problematic thing to do? Why?
Because I like them. It's the interest I bring towards them.
Yeah, animals and personal preference, and take some time to replace. Well, it's interesting, right? So we don't really know, because we're all deciding, different answers. But I think that the thing is, we do know, we're not entirely, I don't think there's a good theory of this in some sort of way. And so what we did was we went back into, a philosophical distinction between intrinsic and extrinsic value. Now, intrinsically valuable things are things which have value in their own right. Now, humans have value in their own right, because that's why you're not allowed to use them as slaves. You can't just get a human and make it do what you want. It's not ethically right, because it's seen to have value. Humans are seen to have value in their own right? And to the extent that we think that animals should be given bodily freedom, well, that's because we believe that they have their own right to bodily freedom. It's not because it's going to do us some good because we want to use them now to drag our chariots around. That's not the purpose of the bodily freedom, right? So this can be compared to extrinsic value or instrumental value. And these are things which have value because they're an effective means to an end. Money is a great example of something that is extrinsic value. It has no intrinsic value at all. So maybe it's this way we can start to think about how it is that we can value things outside of those things which have mind. So we developed, with the help of some participants on MTurk, people who could generate lists of things. We sort of come up with this list. Now it's a bit idiosyncratic, but you can see there on the left are things which have high levels of intrinsic value, and sort of a comparable sort of target on the right, which have low intrinsic value. So old growth forests versus tree plantations, original artworks versus prints of artworks, rare coins versus common currency, something that's old, a copy of something original, sacred land, the land for building development, diverse ecosystem, natural resource. There's a few different things there. So again, these on the left are the things which people sort of rated as having higher levels. They were valuable in and of themselves. Now we asked people how long to destroy these various different sorts of things, and we found that people intuitively thought that destroying the intrinsically valuable things was more morally wrong. So then we demonstrated the same experiment we just did then, that there is that intuition, it's wrong to destroy this stuff. But one of the predictors in that was that people were worried about other people who maybe own these things, perhaps it's got to do with someone else. So this is one of the basic problems with an environmental ethic, is how do we get around the fact that perhaps we're just saving it for our own benefit? Are old growth forests only valuable because we think that they're beautiful? And is it valuable beyond that? I think to get a true environmental ethic, you need to be able to understand how something is valuable beyond simply my enjoyment of it, because then it's just about me again, right? So can we actually break that cycle and find a way to capture value in these things which doesn't have anything to do with me? Now, this may or may not convince you, but we, again, a bit of a thought experiment. This is a last man standing thought experiment. So there's, imagine the entire world's collapsed and there is just one man left. He's about to depart the Earth from another planet. Before he goes, he decides to destroy many things that are left on Earth, as if no humans left. Does it now matter to destroy these intrinsically valuable things? Apparently, yes. So even when we imagine there's nobody else there, it's still wrong to destroy Picasso. It's still wrong to destroy the old growth forest. So we still have this intuition. Now, I wanted to get, we had a fairly idiosyncratic list of things there. I won't get into the details of this, but we've also started to get at, what are the kinds of factors underlying this. So, whether something's economically valuable, whether it's useful, whether it's seen to possess, we used a much bigger list of things in this study and asked people to rate these various qualities. These sorts of things don't predict whether or not we think it's morally wrong to destroy something, but these things do. How rare it is, how old it is, whether it possesses a mind, how beautiful it is, how personal it is, and how sacred it is. Now, these are sorts of qualities. Now, when we compare this with just straightforward judgments of intrinsic value seems to be explaining the variance across a range of different sorts of things. So some things are valuable because they're beautiful, but underlying that, the kind of overarching, category of concern here is this notion of it's valuable because it has value in its own self. It's something which has its own rights. It's something which we don't destroy it because it matters for its own sake. Okay, all of these qualities are really things which make us think about that level of value. So, just to summarise, our need for resources is increasing. Resources themselves are becoming more scarce. Yet we are becoming more sensitive to the rights and needs of many resources, or at least non-human contenders for those resources. And I think that there is a moral bottleneck which is happening, and all of this is happening at once, creating a kind of, this kind of level of conflict. And that's just in my collaborators with the work. So thank you very much.